I see. Commissioner, have you given any guidance to your membership about the allocation of the revenue share with regards to Title IX? What people recently discussed going to the football and men's basketball? Have you had discussions with your membership and any guidance along those lines?
Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion. You can imagine the system was new. We've been working to sort of implement it for more than for basically more than a year at this point since we made the agreement principle to approve this out back. This was last May of 24. I think consistently throughout everywhere, people are taking a market-based approach to how they allocate their share. One thing about the way this system is built, there's no obligation to get to any number. What sports you choose to support, how you allocate the money among your student athletes, that's really a decision that's made institutionally. So in the Big 10, what we focused on is letting our members make decisions they think are right for their programs, right for their student athletes, and continue to provide the benefits that we're doing in support for all of the teams. So really it's an individual school decision about that. But I would tell you consistently you're seeing more of a revenue market-based approach in terms of how the revenue share is allocated among members.
Far right. Stuart Mandel from The Athletic. Tony, when talking about CFP format, obviously you have a lot of constituents, coaches, ADs, and so on. The public, the fans, have indicated overwhelmingly they do not want a system where certain conferences get more bids than others. At what point, how much emphasis at all to what the public want coming to decision takers?
Well, first, I'll take issue with the way you're phrasing that. I don't really know. I'm not aware of massive studies, no research that have demonstrated that.
It's not a scientific poll, but a poll I put on Twitter this morning, it was 76% for 5+11, 24% for maybe you guys want.
I think we feel pretty strongly that fans will really gravitate to a playing weekend. That providing games that are do or die on the field will drive fan interest. Whether there's enough information that fans have in any one poll about what a new system will be, I'm not aware of how it's phrased or not. I just believe when talking to our league, the weekend that we're talking about, we had championship games and across all conferences, we competitive games. I don't see how that's a bad thing for college football. And I think fans are gravitating to it.
In the middle, somewhere. Good morning, Commissioner. Okay. Good morning, Commissioner. Bobby Kyrie with Women's College Football. You've talked about your concerns over subjectivity in an expanded playoff format like a 5+11. Do you feel there was issues with subjectivity in the committee this past season that leads you to that conclusion?
I think it's been a really hard thing to do for a long time. Going back to the BCS and deciding who the two teams are, and going back to the 14 playoff, it hasn't been easy. And I think I'm not going to comment on the last couple of seasons, but I think there are a lot of places. I think it's also teams not getting consideration. There's a lot of that. So the idea that I'm not going to point to any one school, whether it's in our league or outside of our league, you can go back and look at the reaction and the rankings come out and who's invited and see all that yourself. But at the end of the day, I think there's been a lot of concern about how those decisions are made. I focus on that because how are we differentiating from teams that don't have head-to-head play, teams that don't play common schedules across leagues that do different things? I think that's a really hard, tall order. And the point I'll make is that every time you think about expansion, there's some sort of counter idea that it gets easier to make these decisions. Actually, it's harder. More teams look alike. More teams are going to have 9-3 records. More teams are going to struggle in a conference road game. More teams might stumble in a conference home game. Some teams play tougher non-conference games. And there's also just the evolution of how you go through the season, how you do the playoffs. So I just think that those decisions are really difficult to make. And I know this has been a system we've used for a really long time, but I have a hard time believing expanding it and making decisions easier.
On your far left, at B10 TV, there's a report out that you wrote a letter to the NCAA about the Michigan science field scandal. Curious whether the letter happened or not. Do you believe that should be put to bed, that the punishment that you issued is strong enough and that the investigation should be public?
Yeah, well, the first part, we confirm that we did submit a letter. It's not uncommon in proceedings for conference office to weigh in on. So I'm not going to address what the contents of the letter we sent are. And because it's an ongoing process, I don't think it's appropriate for me to comment about whether it's enough or not while the individuals are deliberating. I don't think that's the right thing to do in the process. But I will say, having gone through this, one thing to point out is I think when you think about the CSC and the discipline and what we're trying to build with the new entity, having an enforcement mechanism that just is faster is a priority, one that reacts more quickly. This is the system we have now. It's been in place for a long time. It functions the way it was built. But I do think there's this consensus among our colleagues that what we're building for the enforcement piece that's going to live inside the CSC, that's got to be there. It's difficult to be still talking about this almost on 2 seasons after. So I think everybody agrees that sort of that part of the process should change. Thank you.
Just a reminder to please state your name and affiliation clearly into the microphone. Tony, standing right.
In the back, Commissioner. Todd Sadowski, Fox 43 Sports and Mickey Game Week. I wanted to ask you about our location here for the next couple of days. In Las Vegas, there's no Big 10 programs here. What went into the reasonings that have them host Big 10 Media Days? They obviously have the College National Championship coming up. What do you see as the future of this city and the involvement potentially in the Big 10 market?
Yeah, I mean, really, again, this was a logistics thing. There were some things going on in Indianapolis. We tried to have brought our media days to Indy. It's worked really well for us. It just wasn't possible this year, and then we had to make some decisions about where to go. We're bringing our men's and women's basketball tournaments here in the next couple of years, so it made sense. And the city's been great in terms of providing us the resources we need to do this. I think obviously, we are a conference that goes coast to coast, so having some presence closer to our West Coast members is not a bad thing. So, just started with logistics to be really can.
First row, right in front.
Commissioner, Steve highlighted Buckeyes and 24/7 Sports Journalists. Question I have is about the play-in situation that you want to institute for the playoff. Last year was pretty cut and dry that you had 4 top 10 teams that should be in the playoff. I guess the trade-off is those teams worked so hard to establish themselves after 12 or 13 games as top 10 teams. Why should they have to play Illinois or Iowa, just as examples, who had early losses? I don't see a clamor for a 4-loss team in a playoff. And doesn't that create a situation where the playoff, which we saw blowouts in the playoff last year, or more blowouts in the playoff, which drive down the ratings and make it less lucrative, perhaps, to put a team that doesn't deserve to be in the playoff?
Yeah, there's a lot there, so we try to do it in order. So the first piece about the value of planning, we're supposed to have to commend our coaches because they obviously talk about the same thing you just raised. It's like, hey, if I'm in a position, I could get hurt by losing here. I think where our coaches came down and our ADs was that, at the end of the day, there are 18 members of the Big 10. You have 17 available opponents, you play 9 of them. Right? So there's a lot of discrepancy, let alone making comparisons across the leagues. There's a lot of issues about how you compare teams inside the Big 10. Your schedule, despite the way it plays out, might be easier than people thought. Numbers may not. We obviously try to competitively balance our schedules. So there's an issue there. Like even within our own league, giving teams a chance. Where we came down is that we were willing to take that risk. If you had 16 teams, you're still with a catch-all. There's potentially 3 at-larges. So in your example of 6 seed beating 3, could the 3 then go into a pool to get in? Maybe. But at the end of the day, I think our coaches are going to take that risk because what they're thinking about is not a snapshot of any one season. They're looking at how do we get more teams in potential. Look, as you expand the playoff, the rest of the bowl system, how we're trying to protect all of that, you're basically driving everybody to this one thing. And it's just, I think in every league's interest, not just ours, to have more teams emerging. Like Indiana did last year, giving more teams a chance to compete. And there's just huge value in having games across. Look, last year, Ohio State was 7-2, we finished 4th in the Big 10. It was undefeated in non-conference play. So, the idea that we can go deep, I feel pretty strongly about that. We're 6-3 in the Big 10. I would argue that's a great record. And if you stumble in the non-conference game, I don't know why that disqualifies you. 84 is a winning percentage. If you project that winning percentage in every other sport, I'm pretty sure you make the postseason. Whether it's hockey, basketball, anywhere else, like that's a winning record. So we condition ourselves to think that you're not 1 or 2-loss team, you're not worthy of competing. There are plenty of teams in professional sports that qualify for the playoffs who can't get past the first round. That's okay. They still get the play. And, we'll figure it out on the field rather than something.
Tony, front row, on the right.
Kenneth Perry, touchdowns and champions, Morning Commissioner. Obviously, it's pretty hard to outdo a national championship. So, just in regards to all the success from last season, what global brand deals might be on the horizon for the conference that you can or maybe can't speak to at the moment?
Yeah, I think you saw it in terms of like what we're going to big out. When you think about the reach of the conference and what we're able to do, like obviously each of our institutions has their own local sponsorship, deep relationships in their own market, their own states. But I do believe that you're going to see this sort of change, and that the reach that we have allows us to do those types of deals. I think we should expect to see more of that and make it more of a priority for us. Because we have tremendous reach to drive large audiences, incredible passion. College athletics across is driving more interest in that person. We're in a good position to expand those relationships.
Far back on the road.
Nicole Auerbach, NBC Sport. Tony, as you mentioned that the Big Ten and SEC have control over this decision with playoff expansion, at their media days last week, talk about at-large models. What is your level of confidence that you guys can figure out one of these models to move forward with? And if so, level of confidence you can do that by that December 1st deadline?
Yeah, I'm not going to put any deadline on it. We've, I think, pretty publicly brought our ADs together, both of these twice, once in Long Beach, once in Nashville over the last 6 to 9 months. Longer than that, but twice during that period. And it's been productive, not just in talking about CFP, but lots of other issues that are around college athletics. And so I do think, we're obviously not in the same place on these discussions. I think there's lots of ideas that the goal would be to bring people back together, have a conversation about what we think works, and then kind of go from there. But I will say, every time we come together with these meetings, we still have our president's advisory group meeting, and good things have happened, not just for the two conference cycles, for college athletics in some places, especially around the summer.
On your left side. Spencer Laughlin, Locked On Podcast Network, Commissioner. Non-conference schedules vary pretty widely across the country. You've got Clemson, for instance, that plays LSU in South Carolina. Indiana plays a very weak non-conference slate. Ohio State plays Texas. It varies across the country. When you have a committee involved for picking a playoff, would you ever support a model where schools are not in control of their own non-conference slates?
That's a really hard thing to change, and it just hasn't come up in terms of that control. I think over the years, leagues have tried to put parameters about playing 184 or what we can do with FCS. I think those things have been in place across. I don't think that's the solid. I kind of focus more on what's the incentive to get schools to schedule stronger games. Those are some of the things we've talked about with the SEC in the season. I think fans want more of those games. I think there's been some writing like, well, those games won't mean anything if you're qualifying off the conference. I disagree with that. At the end of the day, you're still playing for seed and straight seed. So you had a system where you're qualifying off the conference record. Winning or losing a tough non-conference game to affect seed. Plus the models we're talking about, there's still some at-large things left. So I think we got to focus on the right incentive. We're starting to see games being dropped. I think there's a running concern among coaches. We'll hear from our guys, whether they cover this or not, where just winning a big non-conference game help you more than losing a non-conference game does. That's the sentiment. What's the right way to measure that? And also, a lot of these games tend to be played early in the season. You don't quite know where your team is at that point. Like, teams move up and down across the season. Teams get healthy. Some teams are unlucky. It's just really depends. So I focus more on let's create an incentive to schedule more of them naturally, because I don't think we can do this to do it.
Tony, on your right side.
Hi, Tony. Scott Document with The Athletic. Your colleague at the Southeastern Conference has touted his conference is the best in the country for produced materials to suggest their strength of schedule is better than even in some cases a 9-game schedule of the Big Ten. How do you agree with him on that, or do you disagree on that? And also, Indiana was much more aligned last year for its schedule. However, the results were the results. What do you say to that, and how do you say this?
Let's talk about that. We're talking about the Indiana schedule. Look, when the Indiana schedule was made, on their schedule were the two teams that played in the championship game the season before. Right? They played Michigan and Washington both at home, won both of those games. But those are the idea, like that's the part of what this is, right? That gets back to the value of play. Put that aside. Like I'm not going to comment on any one conference. We just stand by what we do with the Big Ten. I think the national results have shown that the last couple of seasons. Look at what expansion has been across the A4 the last couple of years. Stand by about how much tougher our fields got. Global travel, how well our schools protect their home fields, all of that. I think that speaks for itself. I don't know everything is any value in talking about one versus another, but we feel really strong about what we're doing in Big 10.
Our final question, third row.
Hi, I'm here, Detroit East. Good morning, Commissioner. I wanted to ask about the Venmo and PayPal that you mentioned earlier. What went into the decision for the Big Ten to handle the revenue sharing with athletes itself versus maybe the member institutions handling it?
Yeah, it really came from, we had a AD meeting where we were talking about just going around asking each other, like, how are you planning on making this payment? This is the way to do it. And at the time, the ADs made it like, hey, is there a way we could do this collectively? This really came from that. So Becky County in our office ran a sort of marketing process, and then it became clear that in terms of PayPal to offer technology and hyperwallet and how we're used to, people are with that platform, that it made sense. But we ran a pretty exhaustive process, and then I think there's still a little bit back and forth among all 18 about whether they believe that Central was the best. But we ended up with everybody in, and so far it's gone really smoothly. So far, I think. Every institution is different. Their ability to send money to athletes is really tricky. So having a central system made a lot of sense for us.
Big 10 Commissioner Tony Petitti.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.